I said, I just got done explaining to you why. And she says, okay, let me ask it a different way. What was it about your leadership that led to those results? And that really made me angry. And I said,
You are fired.
여러분 안녕하십니까, 돌콩입니다. 여러분들께서는 혹시 스스로에 대해 오랫동안 가져오신 고정관념 같은 게 있으신가요? 예를 들면 나는 언어 감각이 없어서 영어 공부를 아무리 해도 유려하게 영어를 하지 못할 거야 랄지, 나는 똑똑하지 못해서 가고 싶은 회사가 있지만 어차피 안 될 거야 랄지, 아니면 나는 이런 건 원래 안 좋아해, 저런 거는 원래 싫어해 같은 그런 스스로에 대한 생각들을 알게 모르게 많이 가지고 사는데요. 사실은 이 생각이 실제와는 다를 수도 있고, 또 나라는 사람이 계속 성장을 하고 변하기 때문에 나에게 더 이상 해당되지 않는 그런 사실일 때도 있는 것 같아요. 그런데 그러한 믿음들이 우리 어딘가에 깊이 뿌리 박혀 있어서 우리의 가능성을 이렇게 차단하기도 하고 할 수 있는 것들을 제한하는 그런 감옥 같은 느낌을 받을 때가 있습니다. 내 안의 목소리, 그 내러티브들을 어떻게 마스터하고 나에게 도움이 되어가는 방향으로 길들일 수 있는가에 관한 이야기를 오늘 자기계발계의 대가이신 여러분들 마이클 하얏트 선생님을 모셨습니다. 마이클 하얏트 선생님과 그 선생님의 따님이시거든요. 메간 하얏트 밀러 선생님께서 직접 오셔서 그에 대한 이야기를 들려주셨습니다. 이 두 분께서 이번에 공동 조작하신 책 초마인드에서 바로 이런 이야기들을 집중적으로 다루고 계신데요. 내가 가지고 있는 이야기를 재구성한다라는 그 개념은 가지고 계실 수 있지만 이걸 구체적으로 어떻게 해야 하는지 몰라서 실행에 옮기지 못하신 분들이 계시다면 이 책이 상당히 도움이 되실 거라고 생각을 합니다. 사실 이 두 분의 코칭을 받거나 이분들의 어떤 강의를 들으려면 상당한 시간과 돈을 들여야 하는데 참 유튜브에 모실 수 있다니 너무나 영광이었고 또 감사했고 의미 있는 시간이었습니다. 여러분들께도 실질적으로 또한 도움이 되는 그런 인터뷰였으면 좋겠네요.
Let's just start talking about the new book, Mind Your Mindset. Absolutely loved your book, and thank you for working on this book. You too introduce these 3 steps of mastering inner voice that is called narrator in this book. And step 1 is recognizing the narrator. Step 2 is challenging the narrator. Step 3 is training the narrator. It was really easy to follow if we read this book, but can you briefly explain what each step is and how we can implement that in our real life?
In the first step, another way we say it is you want to identify the story that you're telling. It's so funny because we think about our thoughts and kind of what's going on in our head as just the facts. You know, our perspective on things is how it is. And what we know from the research is that, in fact, there's what happens, and then there's the story that our brain comes up with to make sense of those events of our lives. And then you've got to interrogate that story. And so we can develop, once we're aware that there is this story rattling around in our head, we can start to interrogate it and say, is that really true? Is that really serving me? Is that going to get me where I want? Because what you think will dictate the actions that you take. You did set a goal one time and you were successful, but you forgot about it because your brain has this thing that it likes to do called confirmation bias, where it likes to use your past experiences that match each other to predict the future. And so that's why interrogating is so important, because your brain just really wants to keep you safe. Your brain is all about the comfort zone. We were talking about that earlier. So it just wants to stay safe. And then once you've identified your story, you've interrogated it, then you get freed up to do the part that's really our favorite part of this 3-step process, which is to imagine a better story. You can imagine something that would be empowering. Like, for example, in the goal setting example, maybe you haven't successfully or consistently set and achieved goals. And that could derail you, but you could say, I'm learning how to be a consistent goal setter and goal achiever, or I'm developing the habit of consistently achieving my goals. Well, all of a sudden that changes what actions you take. It changes what you feel like is possible. And all of a sudden your life changes.
Megan, you have amazing stories that you experienced about this. Can you share a little bit about that?
I got really vulnerable in this book, and I told a story about my debilitating fear of public speaking. And this was one of those things, probably for all of us, we have something like this in our life. And I, in high school, watched a dear friend of mine go up to give a presentation in front of the class. And she became overwhelmed with anxiety and basically had a panic attack and ran out of the big classroom where she was giving this presentation. And I found her in the bathroom. I kind of like went after her, and she was just crying and sobbing in the bathroom. And immediately my brain made the association, because remember, our brain's all about safety and comfort, that public speaking was dangerous, that it could lead to humiliation. You could lose control of your body. And oh my gosh, how awful would that be? And fast forward, my dad and I have this company together, and this is probably now 5 or more years ago. And our team came to me and they said, it's the funniest thing. We have this big live event coming up and we realized you've never given a keynote speech for us before. And I'm like, that wasn't an accident. I'm thinking to myself, that was very purposeful. And we want you to finally keynote in front of 800 people. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my actual worst nightmare come true. And I decided I've got to look this story in the eye because it's holding me back. It's keeping me small. It's keeping me stuck. It doesn't align with really who I am anymore. But the secret to breaking through that fear barrier was my thinking. And so I developed a new story about speaking, which, by the way, was not some grandiose, and now I'm a TEDx speaker. I didn't say that about myself because that would have been so far-fetched. My brain would have just rejected it. But I did say things like, I have something meaningful to say to the people in the audience. I deserve to be seen. And so fast forward all 6 weeks of utter agony, working with all these coaches, dealing with this fear. And I finally was able to, at the end of that, get up on the stage in front of 800 people for my first ever keynote. I wasn't debilitatingly nervous. In fact, it was actually fun. And what I didn't know is everybody feels nervous when they get on stage or when they're preparing to get on stage. It's actually part of what makes you sharp and makes you great at what you're doing. And so for me, that was a real watershed moment of there is power in our thinking. And if you find yourself stuck in an area of your life that really matters to you, it's possible to break out of that if you're willing to go through that 3-step process that we talk about in Mind Your Mindset.
Isn't it amazing that fear that you got about the public speaking was formed by your friend's experience? It was not even your own experience.
No,
and it just by looking at it, you can be terrified.
Yes, but it was so visceral. And I think that's important to remember. Sometimes these things that happen for us, they get lodged in the funniest places that don't make a lot of sense. But remember, when we know how the brain works, this drive for safety and self-preservation is very strong. Even if it kind of seems irrational to the part of us that's not our primitive brain, it's very powerful. And so that's where these things get stuck.
This is a nice segue into my next follow-up questions. I mean, we do have a lot of stories, and some stories we have are good and healthy. For example, I was not a runner, and I never thought that I would be able to run. But during the COVID, I was like, let me run to just take care of my health. And I came up with a plan. I decided to run. I ended up running half marathon. I now run half marathon twice a year at least. So that was kind of the story that I'm proud of, and I don't want to edit that story throughout my life. I want to keep just as is. But some stories, as you said, are unhealthy, but I think they're quite comfortable to stay with. For me, it's like starting a business. Like 49% of me wants to try my own business, but 51% of me, like, no, that's not my cup of tea. And we don't have any family member who ever done business in our family. Like they're all writers or teacher like that. And my mom, I didn't experience business or entrepreneurship myself, but my mom used to say that business looks fancy, but it's really, really, really risky to run your own business. And that was deep rooted in me. So I'm just like scared. But it is quite comforting because I don't have to try new things. I don't have to take the risk. And I don't have to learn about new entrepreneurship or anything. So it's almost like justifying myself not taking an action, right? For you, the big event, 800 people, it was a good motivation to get out of that comfort zone. And it's really good to have that kind of external event that can help you get out of there. But without that, I think my question was how we can start challenging those comfortable convictions that we have had for a long time.
I think part of it is that nothing really inspiring or meaningful or significant happens inside the comfort zone. If you want to have a boring life, don't take any risks. You know, it's basically that's like the baseline thing you got to do to have an interesting life, is being willing to do things you've not done before and get outside your comfort zone. And I like to say that, you know, you're in your discomfort zone when you experience fear, uncertainty, and or doubt. So when you have that fear that you might fail, that's actually a good thing, because now the stakes are higher and you're going to perform at your best. You can't just phone it in. When you feel uncertain, it's like, if I can see the entire path, and so that I know exactly what I need to do, first, second, third, fourth, all the way to complete the goal, that's a goal inside the comfort zone. And that's not a goal worth pursuing. All you have to be clear on is, what's like the next thing I need to do? Is it a phone call? Is it, an email that I need to send? Is it a conversation I need to have? If you know that next step, that's enough. And the rest will become clear as you get into motion. But then the third component is doubt. You know, especially if I doubt myself, you know, I think, I'm not sure I've got what it takes to be, like in your case, Sonny, to be an entrepreneur. Well, I felt all those feelings before I became an entrepreneur. But that's the secret to confidence, is that you're willing to do things where you have some self-doubt, but you do it anyway. And in the process of doing that thing, and it looks like courage on the front end, but it becomes confidence after the fact, which is an insight that I learned from Dan Sullivan, who's one of my coaches.
This is such a good example, because kind of like in my own speaking story, where I didn't know that every speaker, except maybe if you've been doing it for 40 years or something, but almost every speaker has anxiety before they get on stage. And then it dissipates very quickly, like within a minute or two, in my experience. I didn't know that. I thought that was just going to escalate to the point of meltdown, you know. And in your case, Sonny, maybe nobody ever told you that every entrepreneur on the planet feels fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's a normal part of taking a risk. It doesn't mean that you're going somewhere bad or somewhere dangerous or you're making the wrong choice. Just like my anxiety before I get on stage for a few minutes doesn't mean that I'm going to lose control of my body. It's actually just part of the process. And so now what I'm able to do when that anxiety pops up for a couple minutes is I'm able to use a little line that my dad says to himself, kind of like a little affirmation, which is, oh, good, that's my body preparing for peak performance, because adrenaline makes you really sharp and it gives you really clear thinking. And so I'm able to tell a better story that ultimately enables me to do the thing that my best self wants me to do.
Michael, can you share some story of yours that you actually experienced this power of editing the narrative in you?
This goes back to the Great Recession, about 2009, and I was the CEO of a public company. We were really struggling. It was a book publishing company. You know, anything that had to do with retail was being really impacted by that recession. So our sales were down. My executive coach came in July of 2009, and she said, how are you feeling about next month? And I said, I actually feel pretty good. I think we're going to hit our budget. I think everything's good. And so then she comes back in August and she says, well, how did things go? And I said, they didn't go so well. And she was like, what? She said, you were so confident when I was here last month. She said, what happened? And I said, well, we're in the middle of a Great Recession. And we didn't call it the Great Recession at the time. We just said we're like in this major recession. The industry is being hit with a lot of different forces, including Kindle books. You know, digital publishing is really having its impact. Social media is negatively impacting our marketing because we haven't quite figured it out yet, but traditional marketing isn't quite working. And plus the economy. I mean, you've seen consumer confidence is down and foot traffic at retail is really down. And so, so that's why we missed our plan. And so she listened politely and she said, okay, but why? I said, I just got done explaining to you why. And she says, okay, let me ask it a different way. What was it about your leadership that led to those results? And that really made me angry. And I said,
You are fired.
It had nothing to do with my leadership. It had everything to do with the macro environment. And she said, well, let me ask it a different way. She said, if you were to go back 30 days, would you do anything different in the way that you led the company? And I said, well, absolutely. And she said, well, like what? I said, well, I would have met with the sales team to make sure that they were crystal clear on their big goal and that it was broken down to the component goals. And so that everybody knew exactly what they had to hit in order to make the big goal come together. She said, awesome. What else? I said, well, I think I would have gone on that call, our sales call to Walmart, because I'm a pretty good salesperson. I think I could have influenced them and made a difference in terms of how much product that they bought from us. And she said, okay, what else? So I gave her, 3 to 5 different reasons. And so she said, she kind of smiled and she said, so you are saying it's about your leadership. Well, the thing that was awesome about that was that until that point, I had told myself the story that the problem was out there. Now, we can't control 100% of everything, for sure, but we can take control of the most important part, which is our response to the environment and what we do proactively to take control of our situation. Once I accepted responsibility, that was kind of a little bit of a bummer. But then I got really excited because I thought, okay, I can lead in a different way this next month to create a different outcome. I can change my thinking about where the problem is, and I can take control of that and produce a different outcome. So that's exactly what I did. And that lesson has served me so well over the last, decade plus of just realizing that the most important thing in determining the outcome in any situation is the way I think about it. And as long as the problem is out there in the external world, nothing I can do about it.
Michael, do you think without your coach, it would have taken a little bit longer time for you to realize that actually the story that you are telling yourself is the core of the problem?
Yes. And this is why I so believe in coaching. I've had a coach for over 22 years now. Whenever I'm doing anything, whether it's running a half marathon or fly fishing or learning to play the guitar or trying to be a better leader inside my business or be a better speaker, I hire a coach because a coach can help you go further faster. A coach has figured out the hacks, the strategies, the tips.
Even if maybe you're not in a place in your life where you can afford a coach, other people in your life can also do this for you.
Yes.
Is they really help you interrogate your stories. Because one of the things we talk about in Mind Your Mindset is how it's difficult to see our own stories for what they are. Stories, subjective interpretations of the events of our lives. And other people don't have the same attachment. They don't have the same fear. They don't have the need for certainty or comfort or in the same ways anyway. And maybe that for you as a spouse or a close friend or a mentor, and certainly a paid coach or a therapist can be this, but it's so valuable, particularly like in my own story, when you have a story where you are really stuck in it and you just can't seem to think differently about it, even though you're trying, that's where an outside resource can be so beneficial.
Megan, you said that you guys are not therapists, but this is turning into kind of therapy session, I think, a little bit. So I know we have 4 minutes, so this is going to be my last question. This is a message for Korean readers. The Korean society is a pretty competitive society, and it's a very populated densely, so they are exposed a lot to also external harsh voices too, right? So they almost like internalize those harshness within them, and then sometimes that sounds like their own voice, and it's really hard to overcome that. So for those young professionals who are overwhelmed by all this harshness inside, outside, if you have any insights that you want to share, that's going to be my last question today.
Particularly what you just said at the beginning was really great. A lot of people have this. And my experience is that whatever you're feeling, just to normalize that, that's probably how most people feel. And I don't think that what you shared, Sunny, is even specific to Korean culture, because I think Americans have a lot of that same thing. I encounter clients all the time that have those voices and that harsh criticism and all that. But I think realizing you're normal. And then second of all, that you really can change the narrative. And journaling is a great place to start. And I like to write down the thoughts that the narrator is saying and then transform those into something more empowering. It's essentially a very deliberate intention to rewire your brain.
Megan?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just to become conscious of those stories, that they're not from you, that they're external. And we talk about this in the book. Our stories don't just come from us. They come from other people. They come from our culture. They come from our families. They come from our educational background, all those places. And the great thing is when you become aware that they are options, but they don't have to be your default, you can choose something that's better. The real PowerPoint is having awareness, because for most of us, these internalized messages, like what you're talking about, Sunny, we just kind of accept them because they're handed to us like we should accept them unconsciously. Particularly in this case, you can use the process of self-awareness to ultimately decide, okay, what do I want to keep? And what's going to be helpful for me and who I want to become in the future I want to create? And what maybe do I want to revise so that ultimately aligns better with where I'm going in my life and what I want?